I just wanted to sort of get your background, what kind of lifestyle you had, any particular struggles that you went through, any challenging circumstances, study tools that you used, strategies for actually studying for all these different portions of the exam, emotional ups and downs. I think it's important to recognize and call out those strong emotions that people feel during this process. So that's kind of the overview of what I would like to talk about, if that's okay with you.
So I worked between undergrad and law school for about 5 years. So I was not the most, definitely not the oldest in my law school class, but not the most traditional student. I'd say people are either KJD or they take 2 to 3 years off. So I was a bit longer than that. This was July 24 was my first attempt at the bar exam. I found that being slightly older, both in law school and studying for the bar, at least gave me the time management skills to sort of treat it like a full-time job.
But you didn't have a full-time job separate, or did you?
No, I ended my job in 2021 right before law school and then just went as a traditional law school student the whole way through, all 3 years.
Okay, so you just graduated, you just took the bar, and then you passed it one and done.
Thankfully, because I don't know what I would have done otherwise.
I mean, well, it's not that uncommon for people to retake the exam, deal with a lot of them, as you might know. But yeah, of course, it's great that you passed it. It's always great to just get it done once and then you don't have to think about it anymore. Do you have a job lined up, or what are your plans going forward?
Yeah, I'm working at a firm right now.
Okay, great. Everything just turned out the way you expected or you hoped for, I guess.
I'm very lucky that it turned out the way I hoped, but I don't think it's by sheer luck. I think it took finding things like your materials and not just doing Themis that got me here.
Okay, tell me more about that. It sounds like you signed up for Themis initially, and then it sounded like there's some kind of switch that happened.
Yeah, I had the fortune of having Themis paid for by my firm, which was very, very helpful. And I also had not taken as many bar courses in law school as I think I underestimated what the bar would be when I was a 2L and a 3L. I thought, okay, wills and trusts, I'm not going to take that class. Remedies, I'm not going to take. My evidence class was at 7:30 in the morning. It was my worst class in law school. I definitely should have paid more attention. So I began with Themis's recommended schedule. And in the beginning, it was good to watch the videos to remember rules. But when I got to like contracts and torts, which I had taken and done well in, I found myself actually getting a little anxious because I was like, why am I watching these lectures? What's actually the bar like? I want to know what the bar is like here. There, I started getting a little skeptical with Themis, but then they throw in evidence, and I really didn't do well in evidence, so I really paid attention during those lectures. And then wills and trusts and remedies and community property, I was learning for the first time, so I found it helpful there. And then there were things like my contracts professor didn't really teach us the UCC, which was crazy. But the more and more I spent taking time to do the so-called passive learning on Themis, the more anxious I felt that I wasn't doing enough. Then I decided to kind of explore more resources to get more practice in. I looked into Mary Basics essay book on your website, which you had recommended, your own materials plus her book. And I found that once I was doing more questions in UWorld and even Themis's questions, that I was retaining these rules that I hadn't learned in law school so much better. Yeah. And like I sat through the Wills and Trusts lecture, but having not taken that in school and having never been tested on it, I didn't feel that I got the flow of how to write that essay and do those rules until I really like buckled down. And then so probably halfway through, maybe a little more than halfway through, I decided to keep Themis in the background and like look at what they had suggested for the day. But I did way more tailoring of my own schedule.
So did you continue using Themis as you added on these other?
I did Themis in sort of a self-study way. So I completed 80% of their material, but I didn't follow their recommended study schedule. So I completed all the multiple choice set, all the UWorld set, most of the essays and practice PTs, but didn't touch the outline, didn't do the sort of like multiple choice questions that are not MBE style, that sort of stuff.
Got it. So you use the course to learn the way that you needed to. Like if you needed some practice in certain areas, you would look at Themis materials and their practice questions and you would do them. But you wouldn't necessarily follow their schedule day by day.
Yeah, I really used it as like a question bank, honestly. If it wasn't free, I don't think I would have used it. I think I would have just used bar essays or something. I would have found another question bank, I guess.
Okay. So why didn't you use their outlines?
I just gave my books away to someone who's taking February exams, so I don't have them to show you. But like, I think the maximum essay I ever made, an outline I ever made for myself in law school was like 30 pages of Word. And I thought that was ridiculous. Most were way shorter than that. And theirs are like hundreds of pages. It's too much to actually memorize and retain. And I think memorization is so important for the bar exam that it's just impossible. And you're not going to know every rule. And I felt that reading through those outlines, it just made me feel like I should know every rule, the important rules and the broader concept. It seemed like it wasn't worthwhile. And in the beginning, I experimented with things. I tried making my own outlines again. That was a waste of time. I made flashcards. Every time I would get an MBE question wrong, I would write down the rule if I didn't know it. And that happens a lot. Like I had stacks of flashcards of just of rules that I didn't know. And I never really went back and like looked through them and made sure I knew them. But I found that just that act of writing it out right after I got done with an MBE question meant I didn't get that rule wrong many more times.
Okay. So you tried creating your own outline. So that didn't work for you, but actually creating the flashcards of the answers you got wrong or the rules that you got wrong. But then with the flashcards, when you were making them, the process of writing down the rules that you got wrong, that helped you.
Yeah, that helped a lot.
Okay.
For example, like I didn't learn about mortgages and property, and seemingly it's every question, property MBE. So just writing down, it's all left my mind now, but just writing down one rule about mortgages, I would do another one and I'd be like, I wrote this down, like I know this rule, I think it's this, and then you can sift through it. But I never used flashcards, I guess, in the way that I had in the past, where you're like flipping through the stack and it's like, okay, what's the rule about assignment and contracts here? Really just to get it pen on paper and like reinforce what I had missed.
Yeah. And I even want to say that just the act of trying to solve questions so that you get those things wrong in the first place, so you could write those flashcards. I think that act of getting things wrong, that's actually the thing got you to do all this and got you to try to remember it the next time you see it. So this process, that this whole theme is you're trying to learn more actively than trying to memorize words on a page, basically.
Yeah, it's amazing. You start Themis and it says, okay, day one, read these two outlines. That's all you should do. I did that. I listened to what they had to say because I had never gone through this experience. I didn't know any better. But I think if I had taken it again, I certainly would have just been trying to get as many things wrong as possible early on to reinforce what I didn't know.
Yeah, I think I actually love that sentiment. Like some people are just afraid to see wrong answers on their page. Like they rate themselves, they get like 40% on an MBE set. And that feels horrible at first. But then, the way you describe Themis, I think it's just kind of insidious that for all that money that they charge, they don't actually teach you how to learn. They just kind of dump this information on you. And then here you go. You just do something with that and now you can pass.
I don't want to like sit here and disparage Themis. I think it did help me tremendously, and it helped me understand what was going to be on the bar. I think law schools are so different across the country that some of these commercial bar prep programs are actually very helpful in sort of teaching you consistency of what will be on the exam. At the same time, had I known that there were other tools out there like Mary Basics essay book and some other things, I don't know if I would have felt the value as much as I did, because I didn't discover sort of alternative things until, like I said, halfway through. But yeah, I think it goes to show that there's no one correct way to tackle this exam.
I think that's exactly right. I would totally agree with that. Could you tell me how my materials came into play and how you use that in your studies?
Yeah, so I had done well enough, I think, in law school because I understand what my professors wanted. I can't think of a professor that I had in law school who didn't post model answers. And they always would say at some point in class, my con law professor was all about the commerce clause. That's all she studied and the big emphasis in class. So I knew the commerce clause was going to be on the exam. The bar is so different because you just don't know. You can't play those games really. Like you can look at frequency charts and you can say, okay, I guess they test this more often. But then you get something like July of 24, where Mary Basics book says in property, estates and land and the rule against perpetuities are not tested on the essay portion of the California bar exam. And you get to essay 2 on the first day, and there's estates and land in a wrap question. So I was really struggling with attacking these essays and going through the sheer number and the absolute amount of issues that let you test. And I started with Themis. I took, I don't know, a dozen essays and I was missing issues. Like I was a one elegant and it really freaked me out. So I went on Reddit. I addressed how I can get better at issue spotting. Someone said, pointed me to Make It Your Last Time. And the like memorizing the approach sheets, that was like what made it click, because it's just like, okay, here's a checklist of everything that could be covered. Let me make sure I'm covering my bases. And obviously in 2 pages, there still might be things you're going to miss, but like 99% of the time, it'll cover everything that property is going to test you on, or everything that PR is going to test you on, or everything that you should address in a wills and trusts essay. So I found that extremely helpful. Like I said, I also started making my own outlines, and I just found that there's no time in the condensed however many weeks I was studying for July that I could do that for 12 subjects. And so just having something that I could reference and maybe make a note here and there if I felt that I could phrase it differently just to remember it or whatever was way more helpful.
Did you use magic sheets by any chance?
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Magic sheets I would like look at as an outline and a reference, and then in conjunction with the issue checklists with the attack sheets. The bar is so similar to law school, but it's also so different that was one of those things that like really helped me bridge the gap.
I think you were talking about magic sheets as a reference, and then you used it in conjunction with the issue checklists.
Yeah, so I was thinking of making my own outlines, and I tried making my own outlines, but it was such a time suck that it really prevented me from doing more essays and doing more MBEs. And so things like magic sheets where you have the sort of like the greatest hits of all the rules in one place was so much more helpful for retaining the important info. And then if I felt like there was one rule that I just really couldn't remember that might not have been on there because it was too minute or whatever it might have been, I would write it in or make a flashcard or something. But I think in addition to helping me study, magic sheets may have come most in handy as like a final breather that I had. Because if I had brought the Themis outline books to my hotel room, taking the bar, I would have just been like sifting through them like a maniac. But just I printed them out, I stapled the issue checklist to the front of the magic sheets. And then before I went in for the essay day, I just gave that all a read over. I was like, okay, if this is what's on the exam, I can do this. It was just like a gut check that I had studied and that it was all there, as opposed to bringing my laptop and going through some PDF or bringing my gigantic bar prep books. So it was helpful in prep, and it was also helpful as like an assurance that I had studied well.
I love that. It's always flattering when people tell me they brought their sheets to the test center and they saw someone else with all the highlights all over it. And as you know, I keep these updated.
Yeah.
Like twice or 3 times a year, send out these big updates. I really like working on these and making sure that people have the best chance of passing. So I'm very glad that they came in handy for you. But I am curious though, when the rules against perpetuity came up, how did you manage to answer that? Like, did you remember something from the magic sheets or like something from practice, or what happened there?
Yeah, that was one of those ones where I just had to like chuckle to myself as I was sitting at the table because it was so out of left field. I don't have magic sheets pulled up. I've tried to like free my mind to mark prep, but I do very distinctly remember that the estates and land are very well defined in there. And there's something I kind of like estates and land. Maybe I have Stockholm syndrome, but that was one of those things when I was studying. I was like, ooh, this is kind of interesting. I don't know why. Maybe because I think it's one of those things that if you get it, it's actually kind of easy. Like you can just, that's at least like bang. So that was my first thought was, okay, this question, even if I don't answer anything else, I can actually talk about estates and land because it is asking what she's inheriting. So that kind of helped calm me down a little bit where I was like, okay, if I don't know anything else, there are points to be scored.
Okay.
And then it was where the approach sheets came in handy is there was a time element and there was death. And I was like, oh, I think there's a rap issue here. And my first thought was, maybe I don't understand rap. And I'm completely wrong. It's not on the California essay, but I'm going to show the grader that I understand rap and I could be missing the issue entirely. Thankfully, I got the question right. I don't know, but I did talk about rap. And I think it's those little things where like, that's where the practice comes in. And that's where like knowing the materials that you have chosen to study with really well, because you get thrown a curveball like that, whether it's muscle memory or you just like memorize the materials you use. I don't know. It just like come to you and it helps. That might be a satisfactory answer, but
Yeah.
Something in my prep, and I think it was the approach sheets had that triggered that light bulb off where I was like, okay, they're talking about time. There could be a wrap issue here. I'm gonna mention it.
Yeah, that's very fair. I think it's hard to be 100% prepared for everything. They
Yeah,
will always throw something, one or two questions that are just like, what is this talking about? I haven't prepared for this. But, preparing for the other things, keeps you more stable so they can kind of focus on this like very new, I don't know how to deal with this type of question. So, that's another reason that, practice is so important, getting all the bases covered.
yeah. And it's funny, it's like clearly you can still pass not knowing everything because I tried and tried and tried and tried and tried. And even if I could memorize the rule against perpetuities, literally till the day of the bar exam, I could not remember California's Civ Pro distinctions and time and all that kind of stuff. And then what do I have in the second session is a California Civ Pro essay that's jury invalidating a juror and timing and sanctions. And I was just like, so I tried to picture your layout of the distinctions between Fed and Civ Pro, and then you just have to go, okay, look, like I've done enough practice essays. If it's 21 days and not 14 days, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, clearly, like you don't have to know everything perfectly. You still passed, even with all these moments of mini panics. It just makes me wonder, like, what is the difference between someone? I'm sure everyone panicked when they saw rap, when they saw like these minute jury timing issues. So from what I can tell, based on our conversation so far, like you again covered your bases by going through past questions, getting things wrong, trying to remember the things you got wrong. And that was mainly in the context of MBE questions that we talked about earlier. But it sounds like that's also the case with your essay preparation as well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Did you use bar essays? I think you mentioned it once earlier, but
yeah, I used bar essays. My law school provided us with an account, which was really nice. Yeah, I felt that there was something about getting an MBE question wrong that I didn't have a whole lot of anxiety about. Like I got it wrong. I would say 75% of the time I was getting MBE questions wrong. It's because I didn't know the rule. So that felt okay because then I would just write the rule down and like, okay, now I have it somewhere. A lot of it was like, I never learned that. It wasn't in the lecture. It's not on Brian's outline. I didn't learn it in law school. I don't know that rule. So I would write it down. And that felt good because I was learning something. The essays were way tougher. Like I really felt that I did well in law school. And I felt that I sort of got law school. And then I started approaching these essays. And in law school, issue spotting was not my not my issue. So then I would read these model answers on Themis, and I would even go on baressays.com and I would be like, wow, I missed a lot. And that didn't feel great. That actually was sort of a big part of my anxiety about bar study. But then, as I said earlier, having the approach sheets helped. It helped me come up with a strategy every time I knew the sort of subject. I just memorized the sort of way to attack these essays and these subjects. And then once I had a better game plan and I wasn't going into it blind, like I had a methodology or whatever you want to call it for each subject, then I felt it was more like those MBE questions where I was doing practice essays and I was only missing issues if I really didn't understand the concept. It was sort of a flag to just like go back, figure out like, oh, okay, I don't know Van Camp accounting, but I understand how to do a wills and trusts essay versus just identifying one issue about whether the marriage was valid and writing 1,000 words on that and leaving it at that.
So it almost sounds like you were able to compartmentalize the essays and the subjects, all of the whole body of what could be tested into issues. The issues were kind of like modules that you either know this or you don't. And if you don't, then you go back and look at it again.
Yeah, I think that's how I frame my understanding of the law generally. I guess I frame everything around an issue and then group all the rules about that issue together. And then that helps me with the rest.
Yeah, so I think it pairs well with the magic sheets, and the acro sheets kind of give you that broad overview of the testable issues. And I don't know if you use the flowcharts at all. It's like another way of approaching a subject rather than just like a checklist, like an if-then checklist. Did those flowcharts come in handy at all?
To be honest, I didn't use them. I'm more of a checklist type person than a visual flow sheet type person, but I can see how they would help another student.
Yeah, I actually added those by request of someone asking for it, or they thought a flowchart would be good. So I was like, okay, why not? Sounds like a good idea. And lastly, with the performance tests, did you do any special preparation? Did you use any resources for that? Or how did you approach the preparation?
So the PT I thought was, not to come off as overly confident, but I thought it was the easiest part of the bar exam. It's the most like lost, right? You have the rules there. So if you know how to IRAC, you should be able to know how to do the PT pretty easily.
Yeah, it is definitely the most learnable section. You don't need to memorize, like you said. But unfortunately, a lot of students tend to neglect this section because you don't need to know anything beforehand. So they tend to neglect it. And then when I see their score report, it's like they got a 55 on it. And if they had gotten 5 more or 10 more points, they might have passed. So, and you probably did very well, well enough to pass here, obviously. So did you not practice at all, or
No, I practiced. I definitely didn't neglect it. I probably did 20 plus essays per subject. I don't need, probably more, honestly, and thousands of MBE questions. And I think I did 9 or 10 PTs, maybe less. I think I probably wrote out 2 or 3 fully and just outlined half dozen or so. I think my first few, I don't know if this is true, but I feel like this is what may trip other people up, is you get a PT and it says you're drafting a research memo to your senior attorney, and then they start doing it like a research memo. It's just another essay that they want basically IRAC'd, but with like some fluff here and there, like a nice intro message, dear so-and-so. And I thought the July 24 PT was tough. The facts were tough, the cases were tough, and it said to draft a closing argument. So that was another curveball. None of my practice was a closing argument. It says in the memo, dear applicant, you're to write a closing argument. Remember, this is not a research memo. This is in court. You don't need to cite the rules or something. It said something like that.
Okay.
And so I thought to myself, okay, do they really want a closing argument here, or do they just want me to do the PT like I'd been practicing the PT? And I decided to go with doing the PT as a practice PT. And I made sure to note that I had read the memo by writing a little intro. And I said, here you go, counselor, here's your closing memo. I've included citations just for your reference. They should not be read off in court, or something like that. So that the graders knew I had understood what they were asking, but that I still didn't want to stray from what I had been practicing and learning through bar.
Okay. No, that's very interesting and sneaky. You got to do both, play both sides.
Yeah, and I made sure to add more exclamation points and a bit more fiery court language. But for the most part, I stuck to what I had been doing.
Got it. No, I was reviewing a PT, a returned one from someone who took the July exam, and that applicant had included citations to the cases, and that person actually didn't even format it as a closing argument. It was very much a straightforward IRAC, like an essay. And I thought it was substantively, it was not a bad essay. It included the rules, included the facts, conclusion, the straightforward classic IRAC, but it got a 55. So I didn't take the PT, so I don't know exactly all the instructions and stuff. But I'm hearing you talk about maybe it was important that you did include, or maybe even at least recognize that you were not supposed to include the citations, pretending you're talking to a jury or whoever the closing argument is for. So I guess what I'm taking away from this is to pay attention to the instructions, acknowledge what they want.
Yeah. And again, I don't know my score. My PT could have been my worst essay.
It could have been. I do think that it's pretty hard to score well without scoring well on the PT because it's a pretty heavy section. Of course, it's not the whole thing, but it is a multiplier of 2 on the written side. So, I mean, of course, it's possible you blew the MBE out of the water, you blew the essays out of the water. Maybe your PT wasn't so-so, but I mean, whatever the case, I mean, you clearly did something right here. When you say you did 20 plus essays minimum per subject, that's a good number in my eyes. Thousands of MBE questions. Yes, 9 to 10 PTs, very fair. And speaking of those essays, how did you review those? You mentioned Themis model answers. You mentioned bar essays. Could you explain, let's say you just finished writing out an essay for practice. Like, what would you do next?
So I didn't write out full essays as much.
Okay.
I did a lot more outlining. probably 60-40, maybe on a subject I was more confident in, 70-30, writing out fully to outlining. My issue was never analysis. If I know the rule, I can really match it to the fact. My issue was always the issue and remembering the rule that goes with the issue. So I would outline or I would write it out fully if it was like wills and trusts and I really just hadn't done it in law school. And then if it was on Themis, I'd read the model answer on Themis because they tend to give you more than is actually passed. And I'd sort of go through it and be like, okay, missed that issue, highlight it, mark it down. And I had an Excel sheet where I kept track of all the essays I was taking. I'd be like, missed X amount of issues. Then I'd go look at bar essays and I'd look at the California model answer and I'd look at passing answers. And I kind of had like a matrix of like, okay, if all three of those sources had this issue and I missed it, that's something that I really need to focus on, right? I took July 2007 and it was a property essay. This isn't real, but they all hit on riparian rights and I didn't have any riparian rights in my essay. Okay, circle back and do that. I found that when I felt stuck, I would go to Marriott Basics book. I did all 6 per subject that she has, and her like flow chart sort of table that lays out all the issues. That was really helpful to like check off that I had sort of gotten everything that she felt was important. But yeah, I'm not going to lie, when I getting to the end and I was still missing issues, it was like definitely scary. And there were a lot of essays on bar essays that had 55s and 50s that looked a lot more similar to mine than the 65s and 70s.
Did it end up clicking by the end though? I know you panicked maybe, last couple of weeks, so you're still missing issues, but did you still feel like things kind of clicked toward the end, or did you go in trusting what you've done so far?
So yeah, I think, I mean, it's really, really hard to walk into the exam day like feeling that you know it. I don't think anyone ever is going to feel fully prepared. But when I was studying, at least the essays started to click at the end. And I was sort of like, okay, I'd do a Civ Pro essay or I'd do a con law essay, and you get into the flow. Or at least I did. I actually messaged you probably on Reddit, I think like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the bar exam. I was averaging in the high 60s on my MBEs on UWorld. And in those last 2 weeks, it fell sub 60. I was like losing my mind because essays started really bad and MBEs kind of started good and stayed good and then just took a dive at the end. And I was like, what am I doing? Are they just getting harder? Am I like freaking out? And you're like, you probably are just doing a little too much and maybe take a few days off of doing MBEs. And I did that. I think it was even closer to the test than 2 weeks because the day before the bar's on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. So this might have been the Sunday before the bar. I hadn't done MBEs for like 3 days before that. And I did a 20/20 set and I got 100%. And I was like, okay, I listened to Brian. That's it. No more MBEs. I'm going to go into the exam. I'm going to take the exam. That's it. So thank you, first of all. And yeah, it's just this crazy process where you seem to be cooking in one area and rolling on all cylinders. And then another thing falls off and you like feel like it's the end of the world, but it's all in there. If you've been doing work, it's all in there, and sometimes you just need to cool off a little bit.
Yeah. No, that 100% must have been a real confidence booster. So you're like, I don't want to take another practice test again. Yeah. I don't want to ruin this karma. So this is a very good story, I think, for a lot of repeaters to listen to, I'm going to be extracting lessons from it so that it's more easier to consume. A lot of this really parallels what I keep telling people to do. And I guess if you boil it down, it's actually pretty simple. It's not easy by any means, but it's
not at all
simple. If you know what to do, it's simple. It's just that people don't really kind of teach you this in law school or Themis. But once you know like what to do, it kind of starts clicking and you start getting things right. And then it's just it's a very tedious process. Did you have any ups and downs in terms of, I know you mentioned anxiety a couple of times. So you were anxious. Did you ever feel like you just wanted to quit? You were just feeling the dread of like the next day of studying, or like did you feel tired and unmotivated? Or maybe even the opposite, you felt elated that you get to do this. And I don't know, like how did you feel throughout the process?
I mean, it's a lot. There were a lot of days where I wondering if it was all worth it. And like, you're taking it in the summertime and you're looking on Instagram and everyone's at the beach. And I live in Santa Monica. And so like I'm looking out my window and like it's sunny and wishing I wasn't looking at negligence outlines. But yeah, that's tough. I did maintain a schedule. I had one day off a week. I made it a priority to spend time with my wife. We had sort of like a dinner date day once a week, and then I would see her or her and friends on Fridays and not do any bar prep from Friday night to Saturday night. I think that helped keep my sanity a lot. And it also shows that like it's the same thing they say in law school, it's just condensed, where you don't actually have to be in the library for 10 hours a day in law school to do well. You can have weekends and you can go to the movies on whatever. I think the same is true for bar studying, but like law school's 3 years, bar studying's 12 weeks. So like instead of taking the weekend off, probably just take a day a week, but you still can. There's no reason to feel bad for going to the movies. You're not going to forget the rule against perpetuities because you went out and had dinner. So that really helped. At the beginning, it seems really daunting. Towards the middle, you start getting into it and it starts to actually feel good. There are times like where you get 20 questions correct, or you just nail an essay and you like look at it and you're like, I wrote Themis model answer just now. That all feels really good. But it's such a roller coaster that if I'm being completely honest, nothing felt good until like that.
No, I'm sure. If we speak about this process intellectually, it makes sense. Do some practice questions, check the answers. But I think psychologically, it can take a toll for some people. Like for me, my first time around, I just, read the outlines, watched the lectures, fill in the notes. It feels good because you're not actually getting anything wrong at that point. You're just like absorbing information. Oh, it makes sense. It looks familiar. But then like 2 weeks before the exam or on the exam itself, you don't know what you don't know. And then you get your scores back and it's like, well, I got to figure this bar thing out now. But I mean, it sounds like you were a lot more conscious than I was the first time around.
Only because you suffered through it the first time and I read your blog.
Yeah, that is my that is what I'm here to do. I'm so happy that you came across my resources, and that's kind of part of the things that keep me going too. It's not just about selling products or whatever. The emails that I write, the articles that I put up, the resources I put together. So thank you for stopping by and putting to practice what I suggest. And you get to spend your holidays without stressing about rap. And did you have any other final comments or advice for people?
That it's a miserable process for everyone, but it's very doable. I'm not some like special person who knew what I was getting into beforehand, and that if I can do it, anyone can do it. You need support and you need grit, but it's really doable. Like you said, it's not easy, but doable.
It is simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I do believe that if you graduated from law school, if you can graduate from law school, I think you can do this. You kind of have the basic foundational skills to be able to absorb lots of information. I mean, it does sound like a platitude, like if I can do it and you can do it, but I think it's true. I think the thing that you did differently from a lot of people is that you were really putting your nose to the grindstone. You grinded out 20 plus essays, even though you outlined some of it. I think that's actually a pretty good way to focus on what matters in the essays, like the issues and the rules. I call that essay cooking, which is just focusing on the issues and the rules. That takes 15 minutes. And then you take another 15, 20 minutes to check the sample answers, model answers. Because like you said, if you know those issues and rules, then the rest of it is just going to flow out. I think you did the right thing and then it turned out well. So I hope people can follow along to what you did, find their own success as well. So thank you again. If you want to stay in touch, I'm always open via email. So yeah, I hope you have a great week or your holidays and you get to enjoy it. And I'm sure you've already celebrated a lot. Enjoy the rest of your career and best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you for the call and for all your materials and guidance and encouragement throughout the process. Again, not a platitude. I really could not have done this without you personally. So I'm, of course, happy to chat and give it back and wishing you the best of luck as you gear up for helping everyone in February.
All right. Thanks so much. It was my pleasure. Take care.